In the unforgiving Dakota Territory of 1867, a grief-stricken widower named Ezra Holloway had resigned himself to dying alone in his isolated cabin until 5 desperate orphan children stumbled onto his land, begging for help. When officials arrived to tear the makeshift family apart, Ezra must choose between the safety of his self-imposed isolation and a fight that could cost him everything he never knew he wanted to protect. Will a man who had given up on life find the courage to battle for the children who brought him back from the dead? The gunshot echoed across the empty prairie, followed by the thud of a jackrabbit hitting the dusty ground. Ezra Holloway lowered his rifle and walked slowly toward his kill, his boots crunching on the dry grass of the Dakota Territory. September 1867 had brought nothing but heat and dust to his small corner of the world, 15 miles from the nearest town. His weathered hands picked up the rabbit by its hind legs. At 52, Ezra moved like a man much older, his shoulders bent forward as if carrying an invisible weight. The rabbit would make a decent stew, enough to last him 3 days if he stretched it with the few potatoes left in his root cellar. The walk back to his cabin took 20 minutes. Each step reminded him of how alone he was out here. No neighbors for miles, no visitors, no one to care if he lived or died. The silence had become his only friend, and sometimes he wondered if it was slowly driving him mad. His cabin sat in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the prairie winds. It was small but solid, built with his own hands 5 years ago when he and Martha had first claimed this land. Back then, it had seemed like paradise. Now it felt like a prison. The vegetable garden behind the house had turned into a patch of weeds. Martha had loved that garden, spending hours each morning tending to her tomatoes and beans. Ezra couldn't bear to look at it most days, but he couldn't bring himself to plow it under either. He gutted the rabbit on the porch, his knife moving with practiced skill. The motion reminded him of better times when Martha would stand beside him, chatting about her day while he prepared their dinner. She had always found something to talk about, even when nothing much had happened. 3 years. 3 long years since the coughing sickness had taken her away. The doctor from Clearwater Falls had done his best, but there wasn't much anyone could do once the fever set in. Ezra had held her hand as she slipped away, promising to take care of himself and live a good life. He had broken that promise every day since. The inside of the cabin was neat but bare. A table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner. Martha's rocking chair still sat by the window, covered with a quilt she had made from scraps of their old clothes. Ezra couldn't sit in it, but he couldn't move it either. He started a fire in the wood stove and put water on to boil. The rabbit would cook slowly while he finished his evening chores. 3 horses waited in the small corral behind the cabin, and they needed hay and fresh water. Taking care of them was one of the few things that still gave him purpose. As he worked, Ezra thought about the letter in his coat pocket. The doctor in town had been clear about his condition. The cough that had plagued him for months was getting worse, and the weight he'd lost wasn't coming back. Maybe 1 more winter, the doctor had said. Maybe 2 if he was lucky. Ezra wasn't sure he wanted to be lucky. The sun was setting by the time he finished with the horses. Orange and pink light painted the sky, and for a moment he remembered why he and Martha had chosen this place. The sunsets here were like nowhere else on earth, she used to say. Like God was painting just for them. He was heading back to the cabin when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in his silent world. Voices, children's voices, carried on the evening wind like whispers from another life. Ezra stopped walking and listened. The voices were real, getting closer. He hadn't imagined them. After 3 years of hearing nothing but his own breathing and the wind through the grass, the sound of other people made his heart race. He climbed the steps to his porch and stood in the doorway, squinting into the growing darkness. 5 small shapes moved across the prairie, stumbling and helping each other along. Even from a distance he could tell they were children, and they were headed straight for his cabin. The oldest one, a girl with light hair, was carrying something in her arms. A baby, maybe. The others followed behind her, their clothes torn and dirty. They moved like people who had been walking for a long time, tired and desperate. Ezra's first thought was to go inside and pretend he hadn't seen them. Children meant questions and problems and connections to the outside world. He had spent 3 years avoiding all of those things, but as they got closer, he could see how young they were. The oldest couldn't be more than 12 or 13. The youngest, besides the baby, looked to be about 7. They were thin and dirty, and they moved with the careful steps of people who were hurt and scared. The girl in front saw him standing on the porch and raised her hand in a weak wave. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "We need help." Ezra's grip tightened on the porch railing. Help was the last thing he wanted to give. Help meant getting involved, and getting involved meant caring about something other than his own slow march toward death. But the children kept coming, and he could see now that they weren't just tired. They were desperate. The kind of desperate that came from having nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. What could possibly have brought 5 children to his doorstep in the middle of nowhere? "Mister, please don't turn us away." The girl's voice shook as she reached his fence, but her green eyes held a strength that reminded Ezra of someone he couldn't quite remember. "We've been walking for days." Behind her, 4 other children huddled together like scared animals. 2 boys who looked like twins, maybe 10 years old, stood protectively on either side of a girl about 8. The baby in the oldest girl's arms couldn't be more than 2, with wispy blonde hair and fever-bright eyes. Ezra studied them from his porch, his mind racing. These weren't local children. He knew every family within 30 miles, and none of them had 5 kids. Their clothes were travel-worn but well-made, suggesting they came from somewhere with money. But now they looked like they hadn't eaten in days. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. The girl's chin trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "Dead. Both of them. 3 days ago." The simple word hit Ezra like a physical blow. He had been alone by choice, but these children had been forced into their situation. They hadn't chosen to lose everything. "What's your name?" he asked, stepping down from the porch. "Rebecca," she said, shifting the baby to her other hip. "These are my brothers, Jacob and Joel, my sister Annie, and little Mary." She paused, studying his face with eyes that seemed too old for her age. "We saw smoke from your chimney. Are you alone out here?" The question caught him off guard. Most adults would have asked about help or shelter first, but Rebecca was trying to understand what kind of person she was dealing with before she asked for anything. "Name's Ezra Holloway," he said finally. "And yes, I'm alone." One of the twins, Jacob, stepped forward. "We don't mean to be trouble, Mr. Holloway. We just need somewhere to rest for a night. Then we'll move on." "Move on to where?" Ezra asked. The children exchanged glances. Rebecca bit her lip before answering. "California. We have an uncle there. Our pa's brother." "California's a long way from here. How do you plan to get there?" "We'll figure it out," Rebecca said, but Ezra could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "We always do." The baby in her arms started to cry, a thin wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her tiny body. Rebecca bounced her gently, making soft shushing sounds, but Mary's cries only got louder. "When did she last eat?" Ezra asked. "Yesterday morning," Annie said quietly. "We had some bread, but it's gone now." Ezra felt something twist in his chest. He had rabbit stew cooking on the stove, enough for one man but not nearly enough for 6 people. Still, it was better than nothing. "Come inside," he said, opening his gate. "You can eat something, at least." The children followed him into the cabin, their eyes wide as they took in the small space. It was the first time in 3 years that Ezra had shared his home with anyone, and it felt strange to hear footsteps other than his own on the wooden floor. Rebecca settled Mary in Martha's rocking chair, wrapping her in the quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, and she stuck her thumb in her mouth, watching Ezra with solemn blue eyes. "Sit down," Ezra said, gesturing to the chairs around his small table. "All of you." The children obeyed, their movements careful and polite. They had been raised with manners, Ezra realized. These weren't wild children or runaways. They were good kids who had been hit by tragedy. He ladled the rabbit stew into bowls, stretching it as far as he could. There wasn't much, but it was hot and filling. The children ate in silence, their eyes never leaving their food. When they finished, they looked up at him with grateful expressions. "Thank you," Rebecca said. "We haven't had anything hot in days." "What happened to your parents?" Ezra asked, settling into his chair across from them. Rebecca's face tightened. "Pa got sick first, fever and chills. We were traveling from Missouri, looking for land to claim. Ma tried to keep us moving, but Pa kept getting worse." She paused, swallowing hard. "He died 2 weeks ago. We buried him by a creek near the old mining camp. Joel picked up the story. Ma tried to keep going, but she was getting sick too. The wagon broke down and one of our horses ran off. Then Ma, his voice trailed off. She died the next day, Rebecca finished. We buried her next to Pa. Then we started walking. 2 weeks? Ezra asked. You've been on your own for 2 weeks? We're not babies, Jacob said, lifting his chin. We can take care of ourselves. You're children, Ezra said gently. Children shouldn't have to take care of themselves. Well, we don't have much choice, Rebecca said, her voice sharp with pain. There's no one else. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and Mary's soft breathing. Ezra looked at each of the children in turn, seeing Martha's face and their expressions. She had always wanted children, had dreamed of filling their home with laughter and voices. Now here were 5 children who needed exactly what she would have given them. But Ezra wasn't Martha. He was a broken man who could barely take care of himself, let alone 5 orphaned children. Getting involved would mean responsibility, and responsibility meant the possibility of loss. He had already lost everything that mattered to him once. There's an orphanage in Clearwater Falls, he said finally. They'll take you in. Make sure you're fed and clothed. No, Rebecca's voice was firm. They'll split us up. I've heard about orphanages. Big families get separated. The babies go to one place, the older kids to another. She pulled Mary closer. We stay together. That's all we have left. You can't live on your own, Ezra said. You're children. We've been doing fine so far, Joel said defiantly. You're starving, Ezra pointed out. And winter's coming. You think you can survive a Dakota winter on your own? The children had no answer for that. They sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. One night, Ezra said finally. You can stay one night. Tomorrow I'll take you to town, and we'll figure out what to do. Rebecca nodded, but Ezra could see the fear in her eyes. She knew as well as he did that tomorrow would bring changes none of them were ready for. As the children settled down for the night, sharing quilts and pillows on the floor, Ezra sat by the window and watched the stars appear in the dark sky. For the first time in 3 years, his cabin was filled with the sounds of life. Soft breathing, whispered conversations, the gentle creak of the rocking chair as Rebecca rocked Mary to sleep. It should have made him happy. Instead, it terrified him. Because despite everything he told himself about staying uninvolved, about protecting his heart from more loss, Ezra was already beginning to care about these children. And caring meant he could be hurt again. But as he watched Rebecca's gentle care for her siblings, as he heard Annie's soft singing, and saw the twins' quiet protectiveness, Ezra realized something that shook him to his core. Maybe being hurt again was better than feeling nothing at all. The rooster's crow never came, because Ezra didn't own a rooster. But the sound of children's laughter woke him just as effectively. He sat up in his bed, confused and disoriented, until he remembered the events of the previous day. Through his window, he could see Jacob and Joel in the corral, brushing down his horses with obvious delight. Easy there, Buttercup, Jacob was saying to the old mare. We're not going to hurt you. Ezra pulled on his clothes and stepped outside, expecting to find chaos. Instead, he discovered something that stopped him cold. Rebecca had already started a fire in the outdoor pit and was mixing batter for what looked like pancakes. Annie sat nearby, braiding little Mary's hair while humming a tune that sounded familiar. The baby was clean and dressed, no longer crying. Morning, Mr. Holloway, Rebecca called out cheerfully. I hope you don't mind. I found some flour and eggs in your pantry. Where did you learn to cook? Ezra asked, moving closer to the fire. Ma taught me before she got sick. She said every girl should know how to feed a family. Rebecca flipped a pancake with practiced skill. The boys are good with animals. Pa always said they had a natural gift. Ezra watched the twins working with his horses. They moved confidently around the large animals, checking hooves and combing manes. These weren't city children who had never seen farm work. They had been raised with skills and responsibilities. Your parents were homesteaders? He asked. Pa was a blacksmith back in Missouri, Rebecca explained, but he always dreamed of having his own land. When we heard about the opportunities out west, he sold his shop and bought a wagon. Her voice grew quiet. He said we were going to build something that would last forever. The pancakes smelled amazing, better than anything Ezra had cooked for himself in months. But as he accepted a plate from Rebecca, guilt gnawed at his stomach. These children were trying so hard to be helpful, to prove they weren't a burden. They didn't understand that helping him only made it harder to let them go. After breakfast, Annie approached him with a serious expression. "Mr. Holloway, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you sad all the time?" The question caught him completely off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "You have sad eyes," she said simply, "like Mary when she misses Ma and Pa. But you've been sad for longer, haven't you?" From the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old had seen through his carefully built walls in less than 24 hours. "I lost someone important to me," he said carefully. "Your wife? How did you know I had a wife?" Annie pointed to the rocking chair. "That's a lady's chair, and it has a quilt that smells like flowers. Plus, you have 2 coffee cups, but you only use one. Observant little thing. Her name was Martha. She died 3 years ago. Do you miss her?" "Every day." Annie nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Pa said missing people just means you love them a lot. He said the hurt proves the love was real." "Your pa was a smart man." "Yeah." Annie's face brightened. "Want to see something neat?" Before Ezra could answer, she ran to her bundle of belongings and pulled out a small wooden horse, carved with intricate detail. "Pa made this for me. He was teaching Joel how to carve too before he got sick." Joel looked up from the corral. "I'm not very good yet, but I'm learning. Maybe you could teach me more tricks, Mr. Holloway. I saw some woodworking tools in your barn." The enthusiasm in the boy's voice was infectious. Ezra found himself nodding before he thought about it. "I suppose I could show you a few things." The morning passed quickly. Too quickly. Ezra found himself drawn into the children's world despite his best efforts to stay distant. Rebecca asked intelligent questions about prairie life while helping him check his trap lines. The twins worked alongside him as he repaired a section of fence, their eagerness to learn reminding him of his younger self. But as the sun climbed higher, reality pressed down on him like a weight. He had promised to take them to town today. The orphanage would separate them, just as Rebecca feared. These bright, capable children would be scattered to the winds, their family bonds severed by well-meaning strangers who didn't understand what they'd already lost. "Mr. Holloway?" Rebecca appeared beside him as he stood watching the twins race around the corral. "I know you said we had to leave today, and I understand why. But could I ask you for one favor?" "What kind of favor?" "Could we stay just one more day? Tomorrow is Joel's birthday. He'll be 11. We've never spent a birthday apart, and if they split us up..." Her voice trailed off. Ezra's chest tightened. "One more day wouldn't hurt anything, would it? I suppose that would be all right." "Really?" Rebecca's face lit up with genuine joy. "Oh, thank you. I want to make him a cake. Ma taught me how, and I saw you had some sugar and molasses." As Rebecca hurried off to plan her brother's birthday celebration, Ezra realized he had just made a dangerous mistake. One day was becoming 2 days, and 2 days could easily become a week. Each hour he spent with these children made it harder to imagine his life without them. But that evening, as he sat on his porch listening to Annie tell stories to little Mary while the twins planned their brother's birthday surprise, Ezra felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a sense that his life had purpose beyond simply existing from one day to the next. The feeling scared him more than any physical threat ever could. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, Ezra stood in his doorway looking out at the star-filled sky. A sound in the distance made him freeze. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast across the prairie. At this hour, that could only mean trouble. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, squinting into the darkness. 3 riders were approaching his cabin, their horses lathered with sweat as if they'd been riding hard for hours. As they drew closer, Ezra recognized the lead horse, Sheriff Morrison from Clearwater Falls, and he wasn't making a social call. Who had told the sheriff about the children? And what did they want? "Ezra, we need to talk." Sheriff Morrison's voice carried across the yard before he even dismounted. Behind him, 2 men in city clothes sat their horses with the stiff posture of people unaccustomed to long rides. Ezra stepped off his porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Kind of late for visiting, Morrison." This couldn't wait. The sheriff swung down from his saddle, his face grim in the moonlight. "These gentlemen are from the Territorial Children's Aid Society. They received word about some orphaned children." The taller of the two strangers dismounted and adjusted his dusty coat. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Inspector Davies. We understand you're harboring 5 orphaned minors without proper authorization. They needed help," Ezra said simply. "I'm sure your intentions were charitable," Davies replied, his tone suggesting otherwise. "But these children require proper care and education. We're here to collect them." Through the cabin window, Ezra could see a small face pressed against the glass. Rebecca was awake, listening to every word. The knowledge that she was hearing her fate being decided by strangers made his jaw clench. "It's past midnight," Ezra pointed out. "Children should be sleeping. The sooner we resolve this situation, the better," the second man said, stepping forward. He was thin and sharp-featured, with wire-rimmed glasses that glinted in the moonlight. "I'm Mr. Hancock from the Territorial Office. We've made arrangements for the children at 3 different facilities." "3 different facilities," Ezra repeated. "You're splitting them up." "It's standard procedure," Hancock explained. "The Methodist home in Kansas specializes in training boys for trade work. The Sisters of Mercy in Nebraska focus on domestic education for girls. Each child will receive care appropriate to their age and gender. They want to stay together." Davies shook his head. "Mr. Holloway, children rarely understand what's best for them. These institutions have decades of experience in child welfare." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Ezra, I know this is hard, but the law is clear. Unmarried men aren't considered suitable guardians for orphan children, especially girls." "And you are?" Ezra's voice was dangerously quiet. "We represent the territorial government," Hancock said stiffly. "We have the authority and resources to ensure these children receive proper care." "Proper care." Ezra looked toward the cabin where more faces had appeared at the windows. All 5 children were awake now, watching the conversation that would determine their future. "You mean splitting up a family that's already lost everything else?" "They're not a family," Davies said firmly. "They're orphans in need of institutional care." "Says who?" "Says the law, Mr. Holloway. And common sense. You're a single man living alone in the wilderness. You have no experience raising children, no wife to provide moral guidance. This situation is entirely inappropriate." Ezra felt anger building in his chest, hot and dangerous. These men had ridden out here in the middle of the night to tear apart 5 children who had already suffered more loss than most adults. They spoke of law and propriety, while ignoring the human cost of their decisions. "What if I married?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised everyone, including himself. Sheriff Morrison raised his eyebrows. "Ezra, you've been alone for 3 years. You got someone in mind?" "Hypothetically," Ezra said. "If I were married, would that change things?" Davies and Hancock exchanged glances. "Married couples are generally considered more suitable for child-rearing," Davies admitted. "But marriage alone wouldn't guarantee approval. There would still need to be a formal adoption process, home inspections, character references. How long would that take?" 6 months minimum, possibly longer. Hancock adjusted his glasses. "But Mr. Holloway, you can't simply marry someone to avoid losing these children. Marriage is a serious commitment, not a legal convenience. Besides," Davies added, "the children can't remain here unsupervised during a lengthy legal process. They need immediate placement in appropriate facilities." Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "There might be a middle ground here." All eyes turned to him. "What kind of middle ground?" Ezra asked. "My wife's sister, Martha Patterson. She's been widowed for 2 years, looking for steady work. If she were willing to serve as a temporary guardian while you pursued legal adoption, that might satisfy the territorial requirements." "You'd trust her with the children?" Davies asked. "Martha's a good woman. Taught school for years before she married. No children of her own, but she's helped raise half the kids in Clearwater Falls." Davies looked thoughtful. "A qualified female guardian could address our immediate concerns about propriety. If Mr. Holloway were to begin adoption proceedings and Mrs. Patterson agreed to supervise the household, it could work," Hancock admitted grudgingly. "Temporarily. But this arrangement would be subject to regular inspections, any sign of improper care or moral irregularity, and the children would be removed immediately." Ezra's mind raced. Martha Patterson was a decent woman whose husband had died in a mining accident. She might be willing to help, especially if it meant steady wages. But the idea of strangers in his home, inspecting his life and judging his fitness as a guardian, made his stomach churn. "I'd need to speak with Mrs. Patterson," Sheriff Morrison said, "and the children would need to consent to the arrangement." "Children don't get to choose their guardians," Hancock protested. "These children have been making their own decisions for weeks," Ezra said. "They deserve a say in what happens to them." As if summoned by his words, the cabin door opened and Rebecca stepped onto the porch. She was fully dressed despite the late hour, and her face was set with determination. "We want to stay with Mr. Holloway," she said clearly. "All of us. Together." "Young lady," Davies began, "you don't understand the complexities." "I understand that you want to split us up," Rebecca interrupted. "I understand that you think we'd be better off with strangers in different places. But we're a family. Families stick together." "You're children," Hancock said impatiently. "Children need structure, education, moral guidance." "We need each other," Rebecca shot back. "We need someone who cares about us as people, not as problems to be solved." Ezra felt a surge of pride at her courage. This 13-year-old girl was standing up to 3 grown men, fighting for her family with more strength than many adults could muster. "If Mrs. Patterson agrees to help," he said slowly, "and if the territorial office approves the arrangement, you'd let them stay?" Davies nodded reluctantly. "For 6 months, while you complete the adoption process. But Mr. Holloway, this is highly irregular. If you fail to meet any of our requirements, these children will be placed in permanent institutional care. No second chances." "I understand." Sheriff Morrison mounted his horse. "I'll ride out to the Patterson place first thing in the morning. If Martha agrees, we can have this settled by tomorrow afternoon." As the 3 men rode away into the darkness, Ezra stood in his yard feeling like his world had shifted on its axis. 6 months to become a legal father to 5 children. 6 months to prove he could provide the kind of home they deserved. 6 months to figure out if a broken-down widower could learn to be a family man. Rebecca stepped down from the porch and stood beside him. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Holloway?" "No," he admitted. "I'm not sure about anything, but I'm willing to try." "That's all we can ask for," she said softly. As they stood together under the star-filled sky, Ezra realized that for the first time in 3 years, he was fighting for something instead of just waiting to die. The question was, would fighting be enough? Blood dripped from Joel's split lip as he stumbled into the cabin, his shirt torn and his left eye already swelling shut. Behind him, Jacob limped through the door, cradling his right arm against his chest, while Rebecca rushed to support them both. "What happened?" Ezra demanded, dropping his coffee cup and rising from the table where he'd been reviewing adoption papers with Martha Patterson, the kind woman who had agreed to help supervise the children. "Tommy Fletcher and his gang," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "They cornered the boys at the creek." Martha Patterson, a gentle woman in her 40s with graying brown hair, immediately moved to examine Jacob's arm. She had arrived 3 days ago with a single carpetag and an instant understanding of what the children needed. Her presence had brought a sense of order and warmth to the cabin that Ezra hadn't realized was missing. "Tommy Fletcher," Ezra growled. The name belonged to the meanest boy in Clearwater Falls, a 16-year-old troublemaker whose father owned the largest ranch in the territory. What did he want? Joel wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "He said we didn't belong here. Said we were just charity cases who should be sent away where we belonged. He called us orphan trash," Jacob added, wincing as Martha gently probed his injured arm. "Said his pa was going to make sure the territorial office took us away." Ezra felt his blood turn to ice. The Fletcher family had influence in Clearwater Falls, enough to cause serious problems if they decided to interfere with the adoption process. Old man Fletcher had never liked having poor families settle near his ranch, claiming they brought down property values and attracted undesirable elements. "There's more," Rebecca said quietly. "Tommy said his father had already written letters to the territorial office. He's telling them that you're unfit to raise children, that we're running wild and causing trouble in town." Martha Patterson looked up from examining Jacob's arm. "It's not broken, but it's badly bruised. He'll need to rest it for a few days." She turned to Ezra with worry in her eyes. If Jeremiah Fletcher is actively working against the adoption, this could become very complicated. Ezra had known Fletcher for years, had never liked the man's arrogant attitude toward anyone he considered beneath his station. Fletcher treated his ranch hands like servants and his neighbors like annoyances. The idea that he was now targeting the children made Ezra's hands clench into fists. "Why would he care what happens to us?" Annie asked from her corner where she'd been keeping little Mary entertained with string games. "We're not bothering anybody. Some people don't need a good reason to cause trouble," Martha said sadly. "They just enjoy having power over others." The cabin fell silent except for Mary's soft babbling as she played with a set of wooden blocks that Jacob had carved for her. The children had been settling in well over the past week, finding their places in the household and beginning to feel secure. Now that security was being threatened by a bully with too much influence and too little conscience. "I should ride into town," Ezra said. "Talk to Fletcher face to face." "That's exactly what he wants," Rebecca said quickly. "Tommy was bragging about how his pa was hoping you'd come looking for trouble. He said something about witnesses and making you look violent." "Smart girl." Fletcher was trying to bait him into a confrontation that would support his claims about Ezra being unfit to raise children. Any show of temper or aggression would be twisted into evidence of an unstable character. "So what do we do?" Joel asked, his voice muffled by the cloth Martha was using to clean his cut lip. Before anyone could answer, the sound of approaching horses filled the yard. Through the window, Ezra could see 5 riders coming fast, led by a man in an expensive hat and fancy boots, Jeremiah Fletcher himself, followed by his son Tommy and 3 ranch hands. "Nobody goes outside," Ezra said firmly. "Martha, keep the children away from the windows." He stepped onto the porch alone, his hand resting casually on the rifle leaning against the doorframe. Fletcher dismounted with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. He was tall and well-dressed, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they saw. "Holloway," Fletcher said by way of greeting. "I hear you've been collecting strays." "Mr. Fletcher," Ezra kept his voice level. "What brings you out here?" "Concerned citizen business." Fletcher gestured toward his son, whose knuckles were scraped and whose clothes showed signs of the recent fight. "My boy here tells me some of your charges attacked him unprovoked." Ezra looked at Tommy Fletcher, noting the boy's unmarked face compared to Joel's battered condition. "That so? Looks like your boy came out of it pretty well for someone who was attacked by 2 kids half his size. Are you calling my son a liar?" "I'm saying things aren't always what they seem." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "I've been hearing disturbing reports about this situation, Holloway. 5 children living with a bachelor, no proper female supervision, running wild around the territory. It's not natural." "Mrs. Patterson is providing supervision," Ezra said, nodding toward the cabin. "She's a respected member of the community. A widow acting as a hired nursemaid hardly constitutes proper family structure," Fletcher replied dismissively. "These children need institutional care, not whatever misguided charity you think you're providing." The cabin door opened, and Martha Patterson stepped onto the porch, her spine straight and her eyes flashing with anger. "Jeremiah Fletcher, I've known you since you were Tommy's age, and you were a bully then too." Fletcher's face reddened. "Martha, you're being paid to agree with whatever Holloway wants. Your opinion hardly matters in this situation." "My opinion matters to the territorial office," she replied calmly, "and to the church board, and to every family in Clearwater Falls who's trusted me with their children over the years." "We'll see about that." Fletcher turned back to Ezra. "I've written to the territorial office detailing my concerns about this arrangement. I expect they'll be very interested in conducting a thorough investigation." "You do what you think is right," Ezra said. "I'll do the same." "See that you do." Fletcher remounted his horse. "And Holloway, keep those children away from town. The next time they cause trouble, there won't be any warnings." As the Fletcher party rode away, Ezra felt the weight of the threat settling over his household like a dark cloud. Fletcher had money, influence, and a grudge. He also had the power to make the adoption process much more difficult than it already was. Martha touched his arm gently. "He's all bluster, Ezra. The territorial office knows his reputation." "Maybe, but he's right about one thing. They will investigate. And if they find any excuse to remove the children, then we make sure they don't find any excuses," Rebecca said from the doorway. She had been listening to the entire conversation, her young face set with determination. "We prove that we belong here, together." Ezra looked at this remarkable girl who had already endured more hardship than most adults, who was now ready to fight another battle to protect her family. The courage in her eyes reminded him of Martha, his wife, who had never backed down from a challenge in her life. "How do we do that?" he asked. Rebecca smiled, and for the first time since the Fletcher confrontation, Ezra felt a spark of hope. "We show them what a real family looks like." But as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that their biggest test was yet to come. 6 weeks later, Inspector Davies returned with a clipboard full of forms and eyes sharp enough to spot dust on a windowsill. He climbed down from his official wagon like a man preparing for battle, his city suit already wilting in the Dakota heat. "Mr. Holloway," he said formally, "I trust you're prepared for today's inspection." Ezra nodded, though his stomach felt like it was full of angry hornets. This was the moment everything depended on, the official evaluation that would determine whether the children could stay or be scattered to institutions across 3 states. Behind Davies, 2 other officials emerged from the wagon. A stern woman with steel-gray hair, who introduced herself as Miss Blackwood from the Territorial Education Board, and a younger man named Mr. Garrett who represented the Church Welfare Committee. Martha Patterson appeared at Ezra's side, smoothing her best dress. "Welcome to our home," she said with genuine warmth. "The children are excited to show you what they've accomplished." Over the past month and a half, the household had transformed into something that surprised even Ezra. The children had thrown themselves into proving their worth with an energy that both impressed and worried him. Rebecca had become an expert at managing the household, while the twins had turned the neglected farm into a productive operation. Annie had started a small school for little Mary, teaching her letters and numbers with patient creativity. "Let's begin with the living quarters," Miss Blackwood announced, pulling out a measuring tape. "Proper space allocation is essential for healthy child development." They toured the cabin first, then the newly built addition that the twins had helped construct. Each child had their own sleeping area, clean and organized. Rebecca and Annie shared one room, the twins another, while little Mary slept in a small alcove near Martha's quarters. "Adequate," Miss Blackwood noted, making marks on her forms, "though rather rustic." "Children need fresh air and open spaces," Martha said diplomatically. "City institutions can't provide the kind of healthy outdoor life these children enjoy here." Mr. Garrett examined the small library corner that Annie had organized, running his finger along the spines of books Martha had brought from town. "Religious education?" "Every evening," Martha confirmed, "and we attend church services in town every Sunday." "What about practical skills?" Davies asked. "These children will need to support themselves as adults." This was Rebecca's moment to shine. She led the officials outside where Jacob and Joel were demonstrating the morning milking routine with the cow Ezra had purchased specifically for the inspection. Their movements were confident and efficient, the result of weeks of practice. "Joel's becoming quite skilled at woodworking," Rebecca said proudly. "He made that rocking horse for Mary, and he's carving a chess set as a Christmas present for Mr. Holloway." The officials watched as Joel showed off his latest project, a detailed miniature barn complete with tiny animals. His hands moved with the same careful precision Ezra remembered from his own youth, when making something beautiful with your hands was the highest form of achievement. "And Jacob has a natural gift with animals," Martha added. "He's training our new colt, and he's helping neighbors with their livestock problems." Jacob demonstrated by leading the young horse through a series of basic commands, his quiet confidence evident in every movement. The colt responded to his gentle voice and patient guidance, like they'd been partners for years. "What about the girls?" Miss Blackwood asked. "Domestic skills are crucial for proper feminine development." Annie stepped forward with a curtsy that would have made any finishing school proud. "I can cook 7 different meals, miss, and I keep the accounts for our egg money." She produced a small ledger written in careful handwriting, showing income from the chickens they'd added to the farm. "She's also teaching Mary her letters," Rebecca added. "Show them, Annie." Annie led little Mary through a simple reading lesson, the toddler's serious concentration drawing smiles even from the stern-faced Miss Blackwood. Mary's progress was remarkable. At barely 3 years old, she could recognize most letters and count to 20. "And what about you, Rebecca?" Davies asked. "What skills have you developed?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "I can manage a household budget, preserve food for winter, and treat basic injuries and illnesses. I've been learning from Mrs. Patterson about teaching methods, and I help Mr. Holloway with farm planning and correspondence. To prove her point, she produced a thick folder of letters she'd written to seed companies, livestock dealers, and agricultural experts. Her handwriting was neat and professional, her language clear and mature. Impressive, Mr. Garrett admitted. But can you demonstrate practical household management? Rebecca smiled. Dinner is ready whenever you are, sir. I planned the menu, managed the cooking with Annie's help, and grew most of the vegetables myself in our garden. The meal that followed was a revelation. Fresh bread, roasted chicken, vegetables prepared 3 different ways, and an apple pie that would have been the pride of any restaurant. The officials ate with obvious appreciation, their formal demeanor gradually relaxing. This is exceptional, Miss Blackwood said finally. The level of organization and skill these children have achieved is remarkable. But Davies wasn't finished. Social development is equally important. How do the children interact with their peers? What about their integration into the broader community? This was the moment Ezra had been dreading. The Fletcher incident had made him reluctant to send the children into town, but isolation wouldn't help their case either. They attend church regularly, Martha said carefully, and they've participated in several community events. Such as? Rebecca spoke up. We helped with the church harvest festival. Jacob and Joel repaired Mrs. Henderson's chicken coop after the storm. Annie taught Sunday school for the younger children when Miss Porter was sick. And we've had visitors, little Mary added solemnly, speaking for the first time since the officials arrived. Mrs. Chen brings us cookies, and Mr. Davidson asks Jacob to help with his horses. Davies looked surprised. You have community support? More than we expected, Ezra admitted. Word got around about the children's situation. People have been helpful. It was true. Once the initial shock of having children in his household had worn off, neighbors had begun stopping by with offers of assistance, friendship, and encouragement. The children's polite manners and obvious devotion to each other had won over even some of Fletcher's supporters. What about Mr. Fletcher's concerns? Miss Blackwood asked bluntly. He's submitted several complaints about inappropriate supervision and potential moral hazards. Martha's jaw tightened. Jeremiah Fletcher's concerns have more to do with his dislike of successful neighbors than any legitimate child welfare issues. That's a serious accusation, Davies warned. It's also true, said a new voice from the yard. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Morrison dismounting from his horse, followed by 3 other men Ezra recognized as prominent citizens of Clearwater Falls. Sheriff, Davies said warily, this is an official inspection. I know. That's why we're here. Morrison tipped his hat to Martha. Mrs. Patterson, we came to provide character references. The next hour transformed the inspection from a formal evaluation into something resembling a community celebration. Morrison spoke about Ezra's reputation for honesty and hard work. Dr. Williams testified to the children's excellent health and development. Pastor Matthews praised their regular church attendance and exemplary behavior. But it was the final visitor who sealed their fate. Mrs. Fletcher, Jeremiah Fletcher's own wife, arrived in her finest carriage, her face set with determination. Inspector Davies, she said formally, I understand my husband has been interfering with these proceedings. Davies looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Fletcher, your husband has every right to voice his concerns. My husband, she interrupted, is a proud man who doesn't like admitting when he's wrong. But I won't let his stubbornness hurt these children. She turned to face Ezra and the children, her voice softening. I've been watching this family for weeks. I've seen how they care for each other, how they've built something beautiful from tragedy. Any institution would be lucky to achieve what you've created here. As the officials climbed back into their wagon, Davies paused at the door. Mr. Holloway, I'll be honest. When I first heard about this situation, I expected to find a disaster. Instead, I've found one of the most successful family placements I've ever evaluated. Does that mean? Rebecca asked, hardly daring to hope. Davies smiled. The first genuine smile Ezra had seen from him. It means the adoption papers will be approved. Congratulations, Mr. Holloway. You're officially a father. As the wagon disappeared down the dusty road, Ezra stood surrounded by his new family, feeling Martha's spirit in the prairie wind. She had always believed that love could overcome any obstacle, that family was built through choice and commitment, rather than blood alone. Looking at Rebecca's tears of joy, at the twins' proud grins, at Annie's excited dance with little Mary, Ezra realized his wife had been right all along. Sometimes the family you choose is exactly the family you need.